recording. All right, I am going to share my screen and we're going to get over to the program. Okay, guys, let me just get my setup over here and get those out of my way. So excited everybody is here today. Let me get that out. All right, I'm trying to move the little toolbar out of my vision here, guys. There we go. And let me get this. Perfect. Okay. We are here today to talk about finding our female ancestors in their clubs and societies. Now, you guys know that I absolutely love researching kind of out of the box, doing things that are a little bit different. You know that I love to research female ancestors. And I think I just sort of came upon it naturally. I never really intended, to be honest, to make this whole thing out of looking at female ancestors. But I think I just, in my own research, I just became enamored with some of the women in the family tree. And so it just became kind of a natural curiosity that got me going with that. So that is part of how I got so deep into researching these female ancestors when it came. And I guess maybe, I don't know if it has anything to do, I actually did attend Meredith College here in Raleigh, North Carolina, which is actually an all-women's college. So, you know, it seems almost a natural progression there. Now, before we get started, a couple of things. You might want to have pen and paper available or just a Google Doc open. You can jot down any ideas, any ahas that you might have as we go. As I said, there will be a replay after this. It is limited time, so I think I've got it set to expire on the 12th, February 12th, so next Friday. So that is available for people to look at. And again, ask your questions as we go. You can pop them in the chat. And if it's something that's a burning question that Carla feels like I probably need to address right away, she'll let me know. Otherwise, I will probably wait until the end to answer those so that we can kind of keep things flowing just a bit. All right, so I would love it if you guys could introduce yourself. This is kind of a fun thing I thought might be fun to do. Just in the chat, if you could put one of the letters. So if you are just getting started tracking down your female ancestors, click, type A in the chat. If you are, making progress on finding that female ancestor, it might be tough, but you're continuing to make progress, put in B. And if you were just totally stuck and don't know where else to go, put in C. I'd love to kind of see where you guys are at with that. And so let me grab that chat real quick and see. All right. Let me see. All right, hang on, guys. Hey, Carla, if you can unmute yourself. Ah, there we go. I'm in my chat now. I couldn't get into my chat. Okay, so lots of B's, C's. We got some A's in there. So great, which I think is wonderful, wonderful. Somebody asked about a handout. I do not actually have a handout for this one. I just finished writing yesterday. We've got some A's, some B's, C's. Yeah, definitely. So we really have a good mixture there. So that's I'm excited about that. So there should be something in here for everybody today, guys. So that will be great. So thanks for doing that. I always like to see what kind of people are. As we're going through, just so you know, at the end of this, I do have a bonus for you guys a bonus offer for you guys to take a look at if you want to, so you might want to stick around. And I'm kind of anticipating anywhere between 60 and 90 minutes, depending on the questions that we have going forward. So with that. Okay, we are going to, by the end of all this, I want you to be able to know how to pursue and use your ancestors' club and society activities in your genealogy research. I want you to kind of understand why you need to do it. I want to convince you to do it. And then I want you to be able to find those. And that's really the key, is being able to actually find them. Okay, so why do we have difficulties finding our ancestors, our female ancestors? They're hard to find. And sometimes to be able to find them, we have to understand why we are not finding them. So in this case, when it comes to women, obviously, first up, they have a name change. When they get married, you get a name change. If they get married more than once, then you might have 2, 3 married names, depending on what's happening there. So those multiple marriages can be a real problem for you. They didn't necessarily keep a lot of records. They didn't generate a lot of those records that we typically search in. The wills, they might have a will, but likely not. They may or may not show up in a tax record. So they just didn't generate a lot. They didn't have a lot of legal status. So they didn't generate much in the way of legal records. And so we struggle absolutely with those name changes. So sometimes when it comes to women ancestors, it's really more about finding and putting clues together and drawing the correct conclusion. In other words, sometimes we all want that one record that's going to say, this is it. And it's less about that and more about actually putting the pieces together. So again, we're used to seeing our female ancestors, they might be in what I call the regular records. So these are kind of those that I check out above everything else. And I actually realized I put cookbooks at the top. If I were making the list again, I'd probably put it at the bottom, but it's still, for me in my research, it is one of my regular records that I check, or community cookbooks. And I realized, I thought, well, not everybody does that, and that's okay, but I would add it to your list, guys, for that. I actually have an entire blog post over on the website about using those cookbooks. But they appear in cookbooks. They appear in newspapers, absolutely. We are going to talk a lot about newspapers today. They appeared in church records, court records, wills, estates. So you might find them in some of those, what I call regular genealogy records, even tax records, depending on what was happening, the time period, and all of that. Oftentimes, if I find them in a tax record, I find them with the next friend actually being noted as well. So just something to kind of think about there. Now, community records, these play such an important part of those female ancestors, because they may not have been creating a lot of those more legal type of records, but they were absolutely taking part in their community. They were leaving traces of themselves throughout the community. They were active members. They had lives. They had exciting lives that they led. And so we have to understand what her life was like there when we're breaking down those, trying to break down that female ancestor brick walls, because the women in the communities, they were, think about this, they were the communicators oftentimes in the community. They were the ones who were oftentimes keeping the photographs, or maybe they were instigating getting the photographs taken and keeping the photographs. I will tell you that majority of my rather large old family photograph collection came through the female lawns, not necessarily through the male lawns. Our female ancestors oftentimes were the writers. If they were educated and had learned to write, they were the writers. They kept diaries, journals. They were the letter writers. So when their ancestor, maybe their sister and her family migrated out west, and your ancestor lived in the east, they wrote letters back and forth, and those letters are important to us. Cooks. They were the cooks. They created those community cookbooks out there that are out there for us to use. Volunteers. Guys, the women were oftentimes the volunteers in the community. They volunteered in the community. They might have been volunteering in the church if there was a need, that type of thing. They were the volunteers. And many of these activities were actually documented. And so that's why it's so important that we get into this level of understanding that female ancestor, to be able to put those clues together for her, with her, and be able to understand her better. So I titled this slide, I love this, it's your and their clubs and societies. And the reason I put yours up there is I want you to sit for just a second here and think about the clubs that you're a part of. Okay, what kind of organizations do we participate in? What do you participate in? So for me, when I sit and think about what kinds of things would I participate in at that community level that might generate a record, well, a women's church group, certainly genealogy societies. I'm a member of some of those. A book club, back when we could still have book clubs in people's homes, member of a book club. I am a runner, as many of you know. I'm part of a run club. you know. So, and when you think about these, you could think about virtual groups, or you could think about, you know, in-person groups, which, you know, can't really do right now as much. But what kinds of clubs are you in? Because our female ancestors, they did the same thing. It's just, well, they weren't doing the virtual ones, they were doing the ones in person, and they had to be more local. So I can be a part of a genealogy society or a book club with somebody across the US somewhere else. But our ancestors, while they might have been, I don't know if a book club was as popular for our ancestors, but maybe it was a quilting bee. Maybe they got together, you know, to create the quilts. Maybe they got together to run a food drive for the less fortunate. Those would have been local events, and they were typically with other people in their community. And so, what I want you to think about that is other people in the community. You're thinking the fan club, their friends, their associates, and their neighbors that are so important to helping them out. And the wonderful thing about these particular types of clubs is they allow us to discover things like married names versus singles. So you might find records for clubs because they absolutely kept their own records. You can discover ways, you know, if your ancestor is there in a married name or a single name. So it can kind of give you a clue to perhaps a marriage. You can put somebody in a time and place. Very important with that female ancestor when we're trying to track them around as well. And again, back to the fan club, knowing who they are associating with. And again, because they were doing this in person, not virtually, and they were not moving as much as we do today, you might very well find other family members. You could find mothers, you could find a sister, you could find, you know, sister-in-laws, people who are related. So that's another way you always want to pay attention to who is around that female ancestor. All right. So what types of clubs were available? So when you're going to consider looking at societies or clubs that might be available to your ancestor from a social standpoint, you know, you have to kind of think, well, what was available to her? Because, you know, oftentimes we don't know just right off the top of our head what's going to be there. So I think, to be honest, the first place that I tend to look are at the church organizations. So any kind of women's group, any kind of women's, sometimes they're called circles, any kind of aid society type thing that's with the church, I tend to look there first, because oftentimes in these communities, particularly if you're researching smaller rural communities, the church faith played a large part in the community, and you do not want to overlook the fact that that's a possibility to find your ancestors' records there. They've been around for a long time, and so we want to be sure that we're getting into those church records. Now, you do need to kind of figure out things like, how do you know which groups to look at? So I wanted to kind of give you a hint here. So if you know the church that your ancestor attended, or if you know the faith that she had, that the family may have come to, then you're ready to go ahead and start your research into those women's groups. Take a look at the church. Hopefully it's still in existence. If it's not, that's going to be a little tougher to do. You might want to look at, I would absolutely go to the local library or call them and ask them about possible newsletters and vertical files that they might have. I might see if there are any church histories that they have been collected in their local regional section. The other thing you can do would be to check with the denomination, check with other churches of the same faith to see, was that church absorbed into another one? Their records might be there, or you may want to go up to the regional or national level to see. Many larger churches actually do have their own archives. The larger church, like the Presbyterian Church, has a wonderful Presbyterian archives, the Methodist as well. So you will find those as well. I know there's some archives out there for the Baptist Church as well. So those are the kinds of things that you might want to look for there. I will tell you, I will cold call a church in a heartbeat, because it seems like, at least in the South, where I do a lot of my research, a lot of these churches my ancestors were in or still are, were very small. They may or may not even be associated with a larger denomination. And so I'll actually just call and ask to speak to the church historian, because many of these churches have a historian, maybe not professionally trained, but they're the person who's volunteered or been placed in charge of taking care of, you know, the history of the church and keeping that. And almost every church I've talked to, there is somebody, whether formally or informally, appointed as that person. And that's the person you want to talk to get into those church records for the women and to see, you know, what groups existed and where the records were kept. So that's a lot on the church, on those church records. But because it's such a huge part in our ancestors' lives, it is definitely where you want to look. Now, if you do not know the church that your ancestors attended, but you still kind of have that sense that, okay, either one is your last ditch effort, or two, you know that faith was important, you just don't know which church they were in, you have some things you can do to help with that. So first up, the first thing you want to do is to research the community and see what churches were available. So for instance, I could not quite figure out why I had an ancestor who attended the Quaker church. I kept finding her in some of the Quaker records, but I could never figure out why she was there, because none of the other families were there. And I knew that this was traditionally more of I think they were Baptist, actually, more of a Baptist family. So I couldn't quite figure out why she was there. I finally learned that she was there because she went with friends, or she wasn't going with her family, she was going with friends, and some women had kind of taken her under their wing, and so that's where she ended up. So knowing what's there in the community is going to be your first thing to do. I typically try to figure out, I'll look at a map if I'm unsure, and I see what was close to my ancestor. So, you know, what were the churches that were the closest? And I start there. I will start researching into their records to see if I can find evidence of the family. And in this case, I'm probably starting broad. I'm looking to see, is the family grouping there? Can I find anybody that was associated with her at that church in a family way? And so I can figure out, okay, this is a higher probability they were probably in this particular church. And sometimes I have to try 2 or 3 to see if they're, depending on where they were living, to see if I can find a church that they've attended, but not always. Sometimes I get lucky with that, but that involves honestly just looking at the map and seeing what's around. I might compare it to the city directory of that time, see what churches were there, put them on a map, compare that to the location where my ancestor lived, and then I'm good to go to start into those records. So again, sometimes I have to start and try several churches, but once I have identified, then I will look into those women's groups to see if my ancestor might have been in one of those churches on that. And you know, it's not fast, I'll be honest, it is not fast. It's kind of tedious sometimes, but it's important research to do. So I wanted to take a look at some of the church organizations that are out there, because there are a tremendous number of them, but I wanted to give you kind of an idea of what's there. So from the church organizational standpoint, you know, for Baptist women, you would find the Women's Missionary Union, which was founded back in 1888, and it's the largest Protestant women's organization. So this would be, they're a national organization, and churches would have their own individual smaller, I guess, unions within the church. So that would be something to look for. If you have Baptist women who attended the Baptist church, you might want to seek out, you know, where were the Women's Missionary Unions groups in that community. United Methodist Women, also sometimes known as church circles, at least years ago they were founded back in 1869. So these go back quite a ways. National Council for Catholic Women. So it was founded in 1920. And basically in 1920, the National Council brought in a lot of the individual women Catholic organizations, which obviously tells us there were early Catholic organizations in those churches. So absolutely you would check with those. The National Council of Jewish Women was founded in 1893, which is an umbrella organization for individuals. What I would actually do when you have some of these national organizations and you're struggling, I would contact somebody there and say, can you help me out with the history of the organization in this area? Again, they may be able to have contacts and to point you to, and they may be able to give you some information that you might not, that you wouldn't readily get. So in other words, how it might have evolved or what other names it could have gone by, so that would help in your search. And then, of course, don't overlook that individual churches could have had women's organizations, women's groups that were completely just unique to that particular congregation's needs. So again, getting to that, if you can get to that individual church, dig into that history and see what was being written up, because in all of these guys, in those church newsletters, oftentimes, if they had a church newsletter, they were writing up what the groups were doing. And so a great place to find these, so certainly check with the church, check with the larger scale regional or national archives type places for the church. Go to the local library, contact the local library, check their regional or local section, and do not forget to look at the vertical file cabinets in those local libraries. If you have not heard me talk about vertical files, very quickly, a vertical file is basically a vertical file cabinet, and it tends to keep a lot, they tend to collect a lot of things that are important or relevant to the community, but maybe not necessarily archival type things that would go to, say, the state archives or a state library. So it's tends to be very local. A lot of times, whenever I get into those, I do find a lot on churches. I find church newsletters, I find little booklets, I find children's programs, all kinds of things. And not just necessarily what we would consider modern, but some that go quite a ways back. Or I love it when the women's group write up their own history, because then you can find a lot of women's names that way as well. The Dorcas Society is another one. Sometimes I think it's called the Dorcas Union, and it was popular in the 1800s. It started in it, and its purpose was and is to provide clothing and other items to persons in need. It is throughout the entire world. It is often church-based, but it's not necessarily associated with one faith. It just happens to be oftentimes kind of run out of a church if a local chapter starts. It is still in existence today. And oops, just skip that last part there. I forgot to delete something out. So definitely check the Dorcas Society as well, because they could have been part of that, and those will be written up in newspapers. Okie doke. So let's think about maybe your ancestor wasn't part of the church groups. Maybe that wasn't her thing, or maybe she was, but that she also was more bent to participate in a civic or a reform group. So this could be something like the suffragette societies, a women's exchange, which was new to me. I'll share about that in a minute. I thought that was an interesting one. A temperance society or temperance union. These are all kind of what I would consider kind of a civic or a reform group type of thing. It could even be, I don't have them listed here, but it could be things later on, any kind of political rallies or political groups that they might have gotten involved in as well. But these were some of the ones I tend to look at a little bit more. Well, the suffragettes. So I think a lot of us know about the suffrage movement. I know it celebrated I think it was the 100th birthday this year. And so it was a really cool way of, I think people became more aware of it. And so it's important that we look at this and see, because these records, the suffragette movement created not only records, it created, if she was a suffragette, look in the newspaper, because they wanted to get their message out, right? They wanted to be visible because they wanted to get their point across. And so they will show up in newspapers, they will show up in rallies. You can even find photos of them as well. This one's actually out of the Library of Congress, but I would encourage you to look in the newspapers for the suffragettes as well. Do not overlook African American suffragette movements. If you are researching the African American population, if you are researching immigrants, an immigrant group that came over, they all had their own suffrage groups as well. So you can find immigrant suffrage groups. Make sure you are checking those records as well. They made important contributions. I typically look less at their records as much as I do for their what's happening in the newspaper with them, because again, they wanted to get their message out, therefore they're going to be in the newspapers a little bit more. Here's one. I love this. Now this is a suffragette record, which I thought was really kind of cool. It's actually it's an English record, and it's those who were arrested. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. This is, I found this on Ancestry. It's the English suffragettes that were arrested from 1906 to 1914. So this is just a quick page, and you can see we had quite a bit going on there. So now the interesting thing is that obviously they alphabetized these women, but this list is they put in locations on them. And I'm not 100% sure. I'd have to go back to the record to see if that's I think that's probably the location where they were actually, maybe the precinct where they were taken. I'm not 100% sure, but it does kind of give you a general location, which could prove helpful in your research as well. Okay, so let's talk about that temperance movement. This is probably more along the lines of what my ancestors participated in, and the men were the bootleggers in my ancestors' family. So it was always kind of an interesting dichotomy there. But the Women's Christian Temperance Movement, or Temperance Union, it was founded in November of 1874 in the Cleveland, Ohio area. And this is actually an excerpt out of it's called the First Quarter Century of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. So it was actually a little quarterly in a book out of Salem, New Jersey. So this is 1909 that this occurred. This was, and it was a little book with some kind of history in it. And I love it. I really wanted to just show you that it tells us, we know that this is July 5th, 1909. We have Miss Mary F. Lathrop. So we know Mary is not married at this point. In fact, she's scarcely out of her teens. So if you're researching Mary Lathrop, that gives you an idea of kind of a general time period for her birth. It tells us a little bit about her. We know who the speaker was. So we have more women that were listed. So we can learn more and more about what was happening. So this was important to them, but we also start to see them being named in the record as well. This is a really cool picture. I thought was fantastic. This is actually I found it on the Library of Congress, but I really liked this one a lot. So this is the Women's Christian Temperance Union of Illinois. And so we have a photograph, and then underneath they numbered it and they gave the name of all of the women in the photograph, as well as their town. So what a wonderful place to search out a female ancestor, but in her temperance union photograph. So this was a really cool photograph. When you do these, I found this one and others similar over at the Library of Congress. And then I just put in the search bar, Women's Christian Temperance Union to see what I would get, or Women's Temperance to see what I could get there as well. So I thought that was a really, it's a fabulous record that you can see. Now the women's exchange movement, now this is something that was new to me. I had not heard of this one, so it's a little bit different. It was established in, let's see, when was it established? It's basically a philanthropic type of organization, and it's to help women sell their handiwork. So the women who, would help women of, poor, dire circumstances, it would help them to sell handiwork. It would help them to sell sewing type things, and it would help them to create their own income. So if they needed to create an income, you know, maybe they needed to help the family out. Maybe she was recently widowed. Maybe, you know, her husband needed some more help. They fell on hard times. It wasn't, maybe it was during a time when the women, genteel women did not go out and get a job outside of the home, but yet they needed to earn money. So this was a way to allow or to help women make an income, but still be at home. So if she needed to, you know, support her children, maybe her husband was ill or she was a widow, that was a way for them to do that as well. Because maybe she needed to earn that income, and that didn't, but society wasn't letting her out the door of the home, you know, didn't think much of that. So it was what a struggle the women had for this kind of thing. When it comes to looking for things like this and finding evidence of your ancestor there, you want to check with I would check the history of the local community where they lived. Check with the museums as well. Is there a local museum? So you want to check, I check local newspapers, I check the local regional section of the books at the local library, but did your ancestor live in a community that has currently a local museum, one that is focusing on the community of serving that particular community or county? Reach out to them and talk to them. Just as you go to an archives, you know that they have records, you know, we know they have records that they're still processing to get into public view. Well, not everything that museum owns is actually going to be in evidence in their exhibits. But they know what they have. They have a very, very detailed knowledge of the history of that area, and they may have some information on the Women's Exchange or any of these groups, quite frankly. So don't ever overlook using them as another type of repository that you can go to. I think you would find that to work out pretty well. Maybe your ancestor was more along the lines of participating in something like a needlework guild. Okay, now this started in 1882. So maybe she was more in the handiworks and could participate in that. We see evidence of that written here in the Ohio Daily Express. This one's actually from 1949. It talks about the Union Unit 60 that's in the newspaper on that. I think I've got a close-up on this one for you. Hang on one sec. Yeah, here, okay, so this is a close-up of that article that was in that red box there. And what I wanted you to see here is again, it's talking about the Unit 60 of the Needlework Guild. They've done a garment drive. So this is one of their activities. It's put into the newspaper. If you look over here, we have a Miss Letitia Rose. She had a tea at her house, and we know that she lived at 207 South Summit Street. She was also the vice president. We know who the president was. We have two other women that are listed. So the Needlework Guild was actually founded in 1882. At this time period, in 1949, there were 77 branches in large cities around the world, and it was interracial and non-sectarian. So this was a really important organization, and you can find them in the newspapers. You find local units written up about their activities that they have done. And it goes on to tell the different areas that they have worked in and what all they found. So I would encourage you to look at those as well, needlework guilds, other types of handwork type guilds that are out there. So what I liked this is it says, assisting in the collection for this garment drive, they had 25 organizations and 76 individuals. They had civic, fraternal, and church groups. That tells me that there were 25 organizations in this community. And as a researcher, I want to know, what are the other organizations? What are those 25 organizations? Because is my female ancestor in just that one, or is she in other ones as well? So I would actually probably research out, October 1949, I would do a search in the newspapers on a garment drive for the area and see if I could find other organizations that were participating, because it may basically trigger give me other options to look at for my ancestor that I may not have been able to come up with on my own. Okay, yeah, oh, here, I just had a little more up close for part of it there for you as well. So again, looking at, these are interracial groups, non-sectarian, and you want to see who else, what other groups might be there as well. Okay, so African American women, if you research African American women, I would highly encourage you to hop over to my website at some point and read the article that Renata Sanders wrote for me. She did a guest post on researching female ancestors, specifically African American female ancestors, and she did a fabulous job. While I understand and can do a lot of it, she has much more knowledge there than I did, and I learned so much from her on this. But one of the things that she shared in our in that post is that it's called the Black Women's Club movement, which was very popular in the 1890s. And basically what was going on is that the clubs were focused on uplifting the African American race. They were trying to combat racism. They were trying to deal with issues on health and sanitation, education, women's suffrage. We mentioned that earlier. So these are clubs that, in 1896 or so, kind of came under the umbrella of the National Association of Colored Women. So this is a national organization. They have records that you probably not as easy to find at this point if they existed. These are the kinds of things you probably are going to want to look for in a newspaper. Historically, Black newspapers, publications, Renata recommended the Chicago Defender. Sometimes they're smaller, more community-focused papers that might be helpful as well. She mentioned one, the Norfolk, Virginia Journal and Guide, which might be helpful if you're in that area as well. They talk about the organization's news because, again, they are trying to focus on these social reforms. So they want to get their message out. They're going to be in the newspapers for that kind of thing. So, and then there were lots of other types of organizations that may have come up as well. Again, looking through those newspapers would be helpful. And newspapers that were focused on the African American community as well. All right, so we know that there are a lot of organizations that are out there that are available to our ancestors, to those female ancestors. Kind of giving you, I've just really kind of hit the tip of the iceberg, but kind of trying to get your creative juices flowing so that you can kind of get that idea of what's out there. And so I wanted to, we're going to talk now about where to look for these types of records and books. And to be honest, it's not as hard as you think. It might take a little time, and it can be time consuming, but it is not as hard as you think. So the first place you want to go, guys, city directory. I love a city directory. This one, as you can see, is out of South Haven, Casco, and Covert. And I will want to pop in there and show you some interesting things. So in this particular city directory, they have a listing of all of their organizations that are in these 3 small towns. These are like 3 small, almost resorty type towns, I think, at that time. And so you want to get into these, and so they have this whole listing of their organizations. So the top one is the Choral Union, and they have listed out all of the officers there. Occasionally, I will find a directory that lists out all of the members, but a lot of times it may just be the officers for that particular group, and that's okay, because if your ancestor was part of that, or maybe you see her next door neighbor in it, or maybe you see the mother-in-law in it, then you want to explore it a little bit further. But it tells me, I would never have thought to look for a Choral Union, but by looking in the city directory, I know that there's one there now. Same thing for the WRC, which is the Women's Relief Corps. They're in there as well. And so that's another place for me to go look. I love it because they have unfortunately, I mean, they have sometimes they're just putting in the initials, sometimes they're putting in more of the, they might put in a miss name, so we know that she's married or not married. And so that's an important as well. And of course, down there at the bottom, we have the WCTU, the Women's Christian Temperance Union, which is a really fantastic way to find those organizations. Let me go back for a second. So when you are in a city directory, now I love city directories, I can spend hours in those. Don't just search the people. Don't just search the named indexes, okay? I want to make sure that when you are in a city directory, you read the entire thing. And I do mean that. Start at the front, look at the front cover, see what is covered there so that you know what is included and what is not included. Then before you leave that city directory, if you've already found your ancestor in the listings, go to the table of contents. It may be the first page, it may be a few pages in, but go to the table of contents and read it. Okay, that's where that it might talk about, you know, the organizations. It may talk about the business, where the businesses are located at, the organizations. It might talk about where the firemen are located at, but it tells you who is there and what types of groups are there. So I would encourage you to read that. I always read the table of contents and anything in the front matter of that. Well, I read the entire directory, but check it out to make sure. Some will have more than others. And the other thing is, if you're not finding it for your community, so for instance, this is South Haven, Casco, and Covert, Michigan. I think it's from like 1898. Consider that look for one that might have several, because each of these was too small to have its own, or look to the next larger town because they may have the smaller outlying communities may be in that particular directory as well. So that's another place for you to take a peek at there as well. All right, newspapers, guys. We got to talk about newspapers because newspapers are absolutely critical to the research for your ancestors clubs and society. Absolutely, they are critical for that. And the first place that I go for doing my newspaper research is the Chronicling America website. And I am going to, I've got a little video here, so I'm going to go ahead and play that for you guys so that you guys, that kind of walks you through it and shows you a little bit about how I go about doing that.
Okay, as we start to dive into newspaper research for the clubs and societies of our female ancestors, I wanted to take you through a quick little tutorial on Chronicling America. If you are not familiar with this site, it is free. And I wanted to kind of show you how I go about a search. Now, in this particular case, I am going to leave it fairly broad with my search terms, and I am going to also make it bigger for you guys, so hopefully you can see it better. Okay, I can do it. All right, so what I do here is come to the first page, and you can narrow this down by state, by year, but like I said, I'm going to keep this pretty broad, and I think the first thing I'm going to try would be the Needlework Guild of America. So this was one of the resources that we talked about. And so when you click that, obviously, look at this. We have over 1,000 results. So it's obviously, if you suspect or have heard stories that your ancestor was part of the Needlework Guild, then this is absolutely something you might want to pursue and see what you might find in the newspapers for them. So I'm just going to kind of click around here and see what I can find. So here's one from the 1915, the Glasgow Courier. And let's enlarge this and see what we can find here. Looks like it's up top. Here we go. And so we have an article. So when they had their meetings, when they had their activities, there might be a write-up in the newspaper somewhere. And it looks like this one is actually included in what they call society news, so local news. And we can read about the members, we can read about whose house it might have been in, and those kinds of things. This type of information will be very broad. It can be very general, or they can be very specific with actual names of folks in it. This is an interesting newspaper in the sense that when you look here for the Needlework Guild, you can find a Young Matrons Club, which has women listed in it. You can find, this is Linger Longer Club. I'm not really sure what that would be, but again, you see a lot of names here of the women that participated. We have the Bridge Clubs. Absolutely. Did your ancestor participate? Were they in the bridge? This would be another place to look as well. So you can see the types of organizations that your ancestor might have been a part of. And look at, when you find one mentioned in a paper, you might find others as well. So let's go back one more and see if we see what else we see here for the needlework. Here's a nice one. This is actually one I've used in before. The Daily Express, and this is the Ohio Daily Express out of Dayton. And look at the big headline right here. I can actually enlarge that a little bit too. And what we find is Unit 60, Needlework Guild completes a garment drive. So it talks about a garment drive. It talks about the tea and the display that was held at the home of Mrs. Letitia Rose. We have an address for her. We have other members listed as well. So again, these are the types of things that the types of organizations you want to look and see if there's anything written up about them. Okie doke. So that's the way I go about researching organizations. So if I know a specific one, then I'm going to go ahead and search on that one for the area. Or if I'm not 100% sure, or maybe I'm looking for others, then I might put in things such as bridge clubs, ladies' teas, anything that I've seen, you know, quilting bees for a specific date range and a specific location. So I might do these more narrow searches when I've exhausted my larger ones.
Okie doke. So yes, so that's how I use the Chronicling America. The other thing that I want you to encourage you to do when you're in Chronicling America is don't forget to seek out those religious type of newspapers, or things like newspapers that are specific to ethnic communities. So the ethnic type, you can actually find those as well. So you could put things up here. You could put, you could, if you know that your ancestors were part of the Baptist church, you could put Baptist women here. You could put Baptist newspapers. You could seek out Irish newspapers as well. So you probably, to do that, I typically go into more of the advanced search and put in those. So that's a very helpful way of finding those more culturally small, unique type of newspapers there. So I would encourage you to play around with that a bit and see what could be there as well. Yes, so we were talking about the religious newspaper. Again, they're critical to that research with what you are looking at and trying to find for them, because they do have a lot of their own newspapers, and you can find and the write-ups of what the women's groups did in their type of meetings. So what we have here, so we have, as we're going along, we've talked about church-based women's groups, we've talked about civic and reform groups, and we've talked about those search directories and newspapers. So those are absolutely crucial to your research for that. The other thing that I would encourage you to do when it comes to looking for your ancestor, your female ancestor, actually this came across my desk early this morning, so I actually wasn't able to make a slide of it yet. But look at those newspapers and look for things such as, if you're in the rural communities, looking for fairs. Did they enter into a cooking competition? Look into those as well, because those are going to be, if they wanted to participate, did they win? Oftentimes the local fair will talk about who entered. And so you might find long lists that way as well. So that could be a way to go as well. So I would encourage you, when you're in those newspapers, to look through those fair type of, for the fairs or agricultural communities, for that type of thing as well, because they're really interesting and unique, and oftentimes you can find photographs of the people who were there. So to kind of put a pretty bow on it, we've learned how to find those clues to those ancestors in her clubs and her communities with that. And so I wanted to take a break. I'm going off script, guys. I actually want to stop the screen, scrap my screen share and pop over to the comments. And then I want to actually go and do a live demonstration of how to find something a little more specific over on Chronicling America. So yes, so I just want to take a peek at the comments real quick here just to see what I'm missing. 4-H is a great term for local rural areas. Absolutely, that's somebody let me know that. Yes, researching the 4-H community, that's a great idea. We've got the garden club, the flower shows, yes. Yeah, so guys, I'm sorry, I did not have a handout for this one. Historical trade directories in Leicester. Okay, I know I'm not saying that right. I know, Russell, I know I'm not saying it right. Leicester or Leicester. It should bring up the page. Okay. Chronicling America. Yes, that's it. Thank you guys for putting that in there. The British newspapers. Yes, Russell, thank you so much for sharing that with us as well. I am not as well versed on the English newspapers, definitely, but the British newspaper archive is fantastic, and actually have some plans to go into that as well. So perfect. Okay, let me head over. I want to share my screen. I am going to head over into Chronicling America once more because I want to get into something else a little bit deeper on that, because I think I want to make sure you guys see that. Chronicling America. Okay, so it's just Chronicling America. And what I will do sometimes is go into the advanced search, and maybe I can, oftentimes, it depends on if I'm trying to be very specific or not. But if I'm looking for maybe say I'm looking for researching my Irish ancestors and I'm looking for newspapers that are more directed to those, I can actually research that as well with putting in a variety of different terminology here. Maybe I'm looking for as well languages. Oftentimes you can search by language, you can search by phrase. So this is the advanced search area that you can go to for looking at those newspapers. This is all of the newspapers, and then the all digitized papers is another place. So these are all the ones that have been digitized. The advanced search may show you things that have not been digitized. That's okay, because you could then get, you may have to pursue getting a copy of it, but you have the ability. But ethnicities, you look at all the ethnicities that you can search here on.
Lisa?
Yes. Are you guys?
Lisa, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm sorry. Did you mean to share your screen with us?
You know what? I did. Thank you so much. It didn't come up, did it? Here we go. Thank you so much for bringing that up to me. I thought I saw it click through and I must have missed it when I clicked over it. Sorry about that, guys. So this is basically what I did is I went back to Chronicling America. I wanted you guys to see, oops, wait a minute, went too far. Here we go. I wanted to show you how I find the ethnic community records. So I go to the all digitized newspapers. You can find it on advanced search, but it tends to give you both the ones that have been digitized, but also some that have not been, which is not a bad thing. But in the all digitized newspapers, you can search by ethnicity. So if you are researching Irish immigrants and you're trying to determine if there's some clubs or things that might be clubs and organizations for women who are unique to that particular ethnicity or that particular area, you can find those newspapers. So you can find like the Irish Republic out of Illinois, the Kentucky Irish American. So you can find those here as well. I just wanted to make sure that I showed you guys that, because it is important sometimes to get those smaller, local, more community type of newspapers, particularly if you're looking at immigrant populations. So that's what I wanted to show you there. Sorry about that. That first screen share did not come through there. Yes, so somebody said, don't forget the state and local fairs. Yes, we were talking about that. The 4-H and agricultural fairs, are the women and girls would often participate in those, and they would also you could have really nice write-ups in the local community papers about those types of activities, definitely on that. So perfect. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Okay, do we have any questions that I can, oh, wait a minute, somebody's trying to get in. Let's see what other comments we have here. Okay, great. Russell put in here the historical directories of England and Wales are free of charge. Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. The directories, and I think the directories for that area go back even further. Perfect. Somebody had a president of the, somebody was the president of the local WCTU for almost 30 years. Oh my gosh, that's crazy. Followed by her daughter and daughter-in-law. Absolutely. So again, a lot of times they come at those types of groups together. You find, you know, family members who are there, and so you can kind of backdoor in sometimes for that as well. All right, let me get back to my screen share with my actual program. PowerPoint here. Okay, we're back. Okay, so we've talked about how to find those clues. We want to look for her clubs, societies, and causes. It is so important, guys, to make sure that we are seeing those and to recognize that we're having to kind of, we have to rebuild her life. We have to make sure that we essentially recreate her life. We have to sit at that computer and we have to rebuild her. One time I had a researcher tell me, actually, I think this was Elizabeth Shown Mills, in like one of the very first times I ever heard her speak. And she talked about the importance of rebuilding that brick wall ancestor's life decade by decade, year by year, month by month, and day by day, if possible. You know, I like to say, if they knocked on my door, I need to know exactly who they are when I open the door. I need to know them at that level so that I recognize them. I can predict their movements. I could predict what types of societies she might have been a part of, because I know her so well. I know that maybe she associated with a certain group of people. I know their religious background. I know their political leanings. I know what she did. Therefore, I can then maybe predict where she might show up and which clubs to research as well. So a lot of it is about researching not only her, but her community and those around her to build those brick walls, but to build those together. So with that said, guys, I do have the Finding Female Ancestors e-course that I have updated, and it is completely self-paced. It is all on your own. You can do it, where you can learn how to search for those female ancestors so that you can add more to your family tree and get that lineage society application done, because that lineage society's applications, female ancestors hold up those things sometimes, definitely. And so I did this was a project, you guys know, if you guys heard the story about this e-course, I came up with the idea when I was out on a run. And I came back and I sat down and I just sent out an email and said, what do you guys think? And so that was literally how this whole thing started. And so I had one woman who broke down her 30-year brick wall, literally within like the first 6 weeks, which was really exciting. And then Julie was talking about how she learned the knowledge and the tools to move forward to finding her ancestors. So yes, it was a ton of fun to kind of run those first groups or two. It was very much a kind of, we all learned together. But here's where it all kind of boiled down to. It has 6 master classes to teach you strategies of female ancestor research. It has handouts to go with each lesson. It has worksheets on each lesson. It has a resource, a fabulous resource list, where it's basically a curated list that it's ever growing. It's in Google Docs. We all add to it so that as we find interesting things, because we always find interesting things when we're researching, we can add to it for others to share. So, and it's also got my a bonus video about using Trello to organize your genealogy research plan, because it's a fabulous tool if you've never used it. So just a quick overview. The first module is we get started. I want to make sure you get started the right way. So we get set up the right way, and then we start right away going into birth and death records. I devote a whole module to marriage records because there's so much stuff to dig into there. Legal records, I see we talk 2 whole videos, as well as this one will be in there as well, on the community, women in the community. And then we talk about how we're shifting focus. Sometimes you have to stop looking to find what you're looking for. Isn't that always the way? And bonus, I have a pop-up Facebook group that I'm going to run from March 1st to March 5th, so that if you sign up before next Friday, before the 12th of February, you will be invited to join the pop-up Facebook group, where we can basically have a Facebook group. You guys can come, we can talk, you can ask questions, you can share ideas, we can be in and out of there and helping each other out as well. So it's not an ongoing one, but it is a short-term pop-up group. So I would encourage you to enroll now. It is, we'll pop the link in the chat. It is, in just a moment, it is just lisalisten.com, Finding Female Ancestors e-course. And I will get that. So this will be a great time. So, you know, I know you can figure this out on your own, but this way the e-course does help you save time, lots of research time, frustration, and it helps you sharpen your research skills at the same time, which really, how great is that? Because they help for other ancestors as well. I think when you research female ancestors, you always become a better researcher overall, because you have to dig in so deep. There is an investment, so right now I have it as special. Normally it's $247 and I have it at $197, or you can do monthly payments, 4 monthly payments of $50, so that's available as well. And then once you enroll, you have immediate access to the entire course, and you can just jump right in. And then I'll email directions out about the Facebook group that pops up. I wanted to wait till after Roots Tech so that before we did the pop-up group, I thought it would be a little less overwhelming, definitely. So I would encourage you guys to enroll. Today, this offer does end next week, next February 12th at 9. And I hope you guys can join us. I'm going to pop back over to you now and take questions and pop that link into the chat as well for you guys. So, Catherine, yeah, for those of you who have already taken the course, yeah, you don't need to sign back up. You'll get invited to the pop-up group as well. So I do have some who've already gone through the course previously. And so for those of you who have, no, you do not need to sign up again. I will definitely get that to you guys. You'll get the email about the pop-up group. And this lesson will be going into, this lecture will be going into the course as well. So you'll be able to find it there as well. So that is all you need to worry about. I'm grabbing that link for you right now to pop in the thing. Yeah, we had a great time with it, actually. I really enjoyed running it that way. And so I've made some tweaks to it this time around, so that we are doing, I've got it just a little different. I think it'll flow a little easier as well. And it's a little more self-paced. So everybody gets, instead of dripping out the content, you get it all at once and you don't have to worry about that. Let's see, let me check. Oh, I got the, let me pop that in again because it went wrong. There you go. There's the link, guys. I just put it in there. I hope you guys have found this to be useful and helpful. Thank you, Russell, for putting in some of those UK references there, because definitely that is an area I'm not as strong in, and so I appreciate having those resources as well. Especially because I've also got a lot of ancestors that I'm going to be researching over there as well. So I'm glad to have those resources as well. So I hope you guys have learned some strategies. I was just popping through, checking the chat to see if there's any questions. If I miss any questions, let me know. Pop it back in, because sometimes they scroll fast and we miss them. Somebody said, is it the ethnic newspapers in foreign language are their translation? So for those ethnic newspapers that I showed you in the thing, they can be in English or they could be in the original language. It just really varies depending on the newspaper. And so if they are not in the if they're not in English, I can't say that they're necessarily translated. You would probably need to have somebody translate it for you. You could try, you know, if you can type it in, if it's something short, if it's just a phrase or something, you want to put it into Google Translate, that might help, but that's not always the best. You're probably going to need somebody who speaks the language. But I would encourage you, if you say, look in the ethnic newspapers and maybe it's a German immigrant newspaper and it's in German, you might want to check with some of the Facebook groups that are online, like the German genealogy Facebook groups, to see if somebody could translate or could make recommendations for you. I think that would be really helpful there as well. Let's see, hang on, I've got all these. Oh, so somebody says she reads German newspapers and sees names and words that you can make out. Yeah, sometimes you can see, sometimes with a German newspaper or certain languages, you can pick out certain words. Others maybe not so much, but yes, absolutely, you can do that as well. Hang on, let me scroll up and see. Okay, great. Looks like everybody's doing really well. Let me just pop back. I'm just making sure. But yeah,
Lisa?
yes.
Lisa, Shari was asking if you have any resources for the Rebeccas.
I do not. I have heard of the Rebeccas, but you know what? I'm going to write that down, the Rebeccas, and I will look at that and see what I can come up with. And maybe after I find the information, I'll stick it on the page. So what I'm going to do is when all this is over, I'm going to convert this to a video and send out the link so you guys can watch the replay. And I will put the information about the Rebeccas there on that when I find that for you guys.
Right. And Tommy is asking a question about, he said he found his grandmom's friends with a woman in a right to vote in South Carolina. And his grandmother died in childbirth in 1920. Is there a place to search? Tommy might need to clarify exactly what he's searching for there.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure quite what way to go on that. Yeah, Tommy, if you can clarify that. All right. Okay, there's another one somebody put out there. Is it Pythian sisters? I don't know if I said that right, but I've made a note of that. Yes, Eastern Star. I haven't found as much on Eastern Star. I know it's out there, but I personally haven't found as much on that one when I've looked, but I will check on that as well. And the Canadian, I don't know as much on the Canadian clubs, but again, I can find those out. These are great. I see another blog post coming, guys. I'll check on the Canadian ones too. That would be a good helpful. And when I find some of those links, again, I will put them on the page for the replay of this and let you guys know that. So you'll get an email from me, watch for that, and I will have the links for that. And any information that I find for these, I will have those out there for you, so you will have some ideas of places to look. There are so many of the societies that are out there. It's an amazing collection out there to find. So
I've actually had very good luck researching Eastern Star.
Have you?
And yeah. So I just emailed the local chapter where my ancestor lived, and they were able to send me some amazing information. That they're very, very interested in helping when you write asking about information about ancestors. So they dug for me and found some great tidbits.
Wow, that's wonderful. And I think I like what you just said about that you reached out to them and said, about your ancestor. And that's exactly what I do. Whether it's a larger group or whether it's a smaller group that I'm just not as familiar with, I will reach out to them and ask them, because that is just, they may be able to tell me very short order, oh, yes, we have an online file, or no, none of that's online, but let me see what I can do for you. That kind of thing. It kind of saves time. It's a little more time efficient. Plus, just making those contacts is so helpful. You oftentimes get the little extras that you might not get otherwise. So anytime I come upon one that I am not sure about, definitely, I just reach out. Much like I said, one of those little small churches, I will do a cold call and just talk to them. And they're, you know, I'd say 9 times out of 10, I have had a lot of success with that. They're very interested in helping. Sometimes I run into the problem of just getting them when they're open, because not all those local churches are open. But yeah, the national group, I forgot the local one. Oh, somebody reached out to the national group. Yeah, absolutely. That's a way to go for it. Okay, so it looks like Tommy said, hang on one second. In addition, Deborah says she's Facebook messaged them and had success. That's a good idea too. I probably try to email first, and then if I don't hear, I tend to forget about Facebook Messenger for that kind of thing, but it's absolutely a way to go. Yeah, so absolutely. And then, so Tommy was asking about his grandmother, her grandmother. In the newspaper, she was listed as attending a women's, oh, I just lost it again. Hang on, guys. Attending a women's vote group 1918, 1919. So you're trying to find, you may not find the group. You could potentially, Tommy, if it's a small enough area, I would reach out to the local newspaper. I'm sorry, not the local newspaper, the local library, and talk with a reference librarian there. Sometimes they'll have somebody who specializes in the local history on staff. And you may want to see what they might have on local women's voting groups for that time period. You could check, they may want to check their vertical files for that as well. Sometimes it's hard to find the actual record for that type of group, those types of groups, but you can find them, again, more in the newspaper. If they have a little newsletter that survives, sometimes you will find that, and those oftentimes are going to be at that very local level, such as in those vertical files or a regional resource room. The best thing I do is I reach out to a local librarian or the local historical society to say, this is what I'm researching, because it's such a specific thing, and to see if they have any ideas for that. That's a good place to go for that kind of thing as well. Check with League of Women Voters. Yes, so they were the successor organization for the suffrage groups. That's a great idea. And that's understanding, when you talk about the League of Women Voters being the successor to the suffrage groups, understanding the history of a society like this. So if you have a society, understanding how it grew and changed, make sure you're looking at what it was in the time period that you're researching, because it may have changed names. It could have, you know, split off into 2 other groups. And so you're looking at a different group. A lot of things could happen, much like church. I think of it sometimes in terms of like how churches, when I do church research, and there's like a lineage of the church almost, because of the way they would change and divide and grow up new ones. Again, understanding that about that particular, those types of societies can be helpful in your research as well, just so you know that you're looking at the right thing at the right time, definitely. So yeah. Local society, okay. Oh yeah, somebody said local historical society. Yep, that one too. And there's always the local genealogical society. Sometimes I forget to say them, even because that's what we do all the time. So I'm going to put that link back in for that e-course as well, if you guys are interested. And if you have questions about the e-course, feel free to reach out to me and ask. I'll be happy to answer any questions about that as well. So any other questions before I let you go this afternoon? I do appreciate you guys sticking around with me and doing this. You guys I always learn a lot from you as well. I hope you learn as much from me, because this is such a broad topic, and it's such different areas had such different types of groups. So it's very helpful. I love to be able to hear from other people, you know, like Carla sharing her experience with Eastern Star and the different ones that we have. So I really appreciate that. Again, for those clubs that we talked about briefly, like the Rebecca's, I don't know if I'm saying this right, the Bathian sisters, Canadian clubs. I will do a little background on that and pop that into the page that I put the replay of the video on, so that you guys can see it there as well, so that hopefully we can get some of those answers out there for you guys as well. So I'm always happy to do that. All right, last call. If there's any questions, otherwise I'll let you go and get on to researching and seeing what you can find out over there. So, and again, if you have any questions about the e-course, just let me know. I will be happy to put that in there. I will pop that screen back up so you can see it and see there it is. So you can see the link as well there. So I hope you guys have a fabulous day today, and I will see you next time, hopefully over in the Are You My Cousin web space. Bye, guys.
Great job, Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.